Kia ora and good morning everybody. Hopefully I don't even need the microphone. I'd like to thank Sue and David and Tracy for putting this together, particularly on behalf of the DHB staff. It's been a great effort and hopefully there'll be signs of things to come. As David says, I'm the first cab off the rank and I've been asked to talk and set the scene really for the rest of the talks of the day, just going over some anatomy. Right, just starting with the heart, because the heart of course is really attached to the aorta and you cannot separate them. Just starting at a very basic level, the heart has two sides, the right side and the left side. The right side of course receives the oxygen poor blood from the body, pumps it through the lungs where it gets oxygenated and then returns it to the left side of the heart. From there, the blood is pumped out around the body via the aorta. So this is probably fairly similar to slides you may have already seen when you look up that well-known research vehicle, Dr. Google, around your aorta and around your dissection. You can see the right side of the heart, the left side of the heart, the root of the aorta, and you'll be hearing a lot of these terms throughout the rest of the day. Right where the aorta starts, it attaches to the left ventricle by the aortic valve, and the aortic valve, as you'll hear from Adam and various other speakers, can sometimes be involved in the dissection process. Obviously the first important structure in the aorta are the coronary arteries, right and left, and they arise just after the start of the aorta. The aorta is then divided into functional zones. There's the ascending aorta, which is this vertical piece going up. There is the arch of the aorta, and you'll hear lots more about the arch of the aorta throughout the day, as it is really a very difficult area of the aorta for us to deal with, particularly in dissections. And from the aorta you can see major arteries going up into the right side of the brain, the right carotid, right arm, left carotid to the left side of the brain, left arm. It then disappears down, becoming the descending aorta, disappears behind the heart and heads down towards the abdomen. This is just a slightly more accurate drawing of what we see when we actually open the chest. It's not just the aorta and the heart standing out in relief. There's all sorts of other structures which get in the way or cover it. Major veins, lots of really important nerves, and of course the lungs, which in this particular picture are collapsed, but you can imagine in a normal state they come right over here and essentially almost cover the heart. So lots of other competing structures. The aorta, of course, isn't just in the chest. It continues down through the muscular diaphragm, which separates the chest from the abdomen. And at that particular level, at the level of the diaphragm, there's a second grouping of really important vessels. There's the celiac artery, which has multiple branches, but in effect supplies the blood supply to your stomach and your liver, both of which are obviously important. You have the superior mesenteric artery, which we'll be hearing more about from my colleagues later in the day, which is an equally important and difficult artery, because if we don't get blood supply continuing to that, all 6 metres of your small intestine and half your large bowel will end up dying, and that's not compatible with life. So it's a particularly vicious artery when it goes wrong. Right renal artery to your right kidney, left renal artery to your left kidney. The aorta then comes down, and at the level of the tummy button, it stops by dividing into the right and left iliac arteries. The dissections, of course, as you'll see in some of the slides later, can come all the way down here. So really I think what is particularly unique about aortic dissections is, particularly when they're complex and particularly when they extend all the way down into the abdomen, they involve a team of surgeons, surgical nurses, cardiologists, and indeed a great cast of people. So it's not just one surgical team who looks after this problem, it is a combination of us. I'm just going to, I haven't got too many non-picture slides, but this is one of the couple. We've talked about the anatomy, the gross anatomy of the aorta and its important branches. I just need to make some comments about the actual structure of the aortic wall. Arteries are thick-walled structures, they're not thin-walled like veins. And the structures of the aortic wall are particularly important. The innermost layer, the layer beside the blood, is called the intima, and it has a very specialised lining of cells called the endothelium on it. The media is the thicker middle layer of the sandwich, of the three layers of the aortic wall, and it can be made up of either elastic fibres or smooth muscle fibres. Now, this is relevant to aortic dissection in that the aorta and the iliac arteries are composed of elastic fibres. This, if you can imagine, allows the aorta to absorb the big pressure wave of blood which gets pumped out of the heart at every contraction, allows the aorta to expand, but because elastic fibres are elastic like a bungee, it also allows them, when the heart's in its diastole or relaxed phase, to contract back in again and push. It's like a counter, it's like a further pump station. So the heart's doing its pump, but the recoil in the aortic wall also contracts and further pushes the blood down. So the fact that the aorta is made up of elastic fibres is particularly important. Smaller arteries, femoral arteries, arteries like the carotid have smooth muscle in them, which allows them to contract down or dilate up and regulate flow. But we're talking about the aorta today, and the aorta and the iliac are made up of elastic fibres. And indeed, we'll be hearing more about the etiology of dissections, but it is the breakdown of these elastic fibres and the splitting of the wall which allows a dissection to occur. And finally, there is a sort of a gland wrap type layer on the outside of the artery called the adventitia. The functions of the aorta is so much more than just the major outflow of the heart. It is the major pipe connecting the heart. We've already said that. It gives rise to the important coronary arteries. It gives oxygen-rich blood, obviously, to all the important areas of our body. So it does all of those conduit-type things. But as I've just mentioned a minute ago, it has a major counter pulsation or counter pump function. The endothelium, which I mentioned a minute ago, overlap and can change shape during the aortic cycle. So you can imagine you've got an artery which is, or a major artery which has been constantly expanding and contracting. You couldn't have rigid cells with the locked junctions between them. They'd be split each time that contracted. So the endothelium has an ability to change shape and maintain continuity throughout the aortic diameter changes in the cardiac cycle. So it's really quite a clever sort of cell layer. It has built-in thromboresistant surface to stop clotting, and by that I mean it has chemicals released on its surface which will stop the blood clotting on it. Of course, blood will want to clot at any chance it can, and by having these naturally secreted substances on the aortic wall allows us to stop blood clotting when it's not required. It also has some chemical functions. The endothelium can release vasoconstrictors, which are localized drugs which can cause our arteries and our aorta to contract down. There's nature full of opposing pluses and minuses. It also has vasodilators, which can allow the arteries to open up. It has chemicals which stop platelet aggregation, and it has specialised nerves, baroreceptors and chemoreceptors, which constantly sample the blood and feed back to the brain and various other things. So this is just a very quick oversight, but the aorta and its functions are so much more than just a pipe. I think it's quite important to remember the other functions of the aorta as the day goes on. This is just a little schematic showing showing what happens. You can imagine that is what's left of the true lumen. You get a split in the aortic wall, blood starts flowing down, and you can see how the split zips down, and you end up basically with a collapsed true lumen, which is this. We'll understand that a bit more in some of the slides I'm going to show shortly, and then a large false lumen. But you can see that what's left is a very much thinner wall, and that is pertinent in terms of some of the complications. Once again, this is just a schematic showing, as I said, that dissections can come down, and this is a drawing two-dimensional of the aortic valve. You can see the normal valve here with its free leaflets. You can see what happens when the dissection comes back down the ascending aorta and gets into the sulcus around the valve. You can see how blood gets into that wall and it collapses at least one, if not two, of the aortic valve leaflets and causes mayhem. Just getting on to some slides now. Here's the aortic root, the arch. Obviously, you can see this is a type B dissection, and I'll talk to you about what I mean by that shortly. You can see the tear is here just below the left subclavian. This is what's left of the false lumen, this little lumen here. You can see a much larger, true lumen here. You can see a much larger false lumen coming down. Now, in particular, you need to start considering how the collapse of the true lumen affects these important arteries that we've been talking about. This is just a schematic talking about there's different classifications, as you'll probably hear further about in the day. The type A dissections classically affect the ascending aorta and may or may not affect the cardiac valves, the aortic valves. Aortic valve, type A dissection can also continue down into the thoracic aorta, but they do, by definition, affect the ascending aorta. Type B dissections leave the aortic root and the ascending aorta relatively alone and are down, basically extending down into the abdominal aorta and sometimes into the iliacs. So there's two very distinctive types of dissection. The more proximal type A affects the heart and may affect the aortic valve. And that is very much predominantly a cardiac surgical territory problem. There is the type B dissections, which come down usually from just below the subclavian artery down into the, often down into the iliacs, and that is a vascular surgical type territory problem. And then, as I mentioned a little earlier, there's the complex ones which involve the arch, which involve a combined effort. Just going to run through some drawings of different sorts of dissection. Dissection isn't just a dissection. There are a number of different types of way the aorta can dissect, and hence each dissection is rather unique, and the solutions, the surgical and medical solutions to aortic dissections also need to be somewhat customised. In this particular one, you can see the patient's had a previous aortic valve repair, and as a complication of that, there's been a dissection, starting just the proximal part of the arch, extending back now, and is causing some incompetence of the aortic valve, and indeed is threatening the coronary artery. So it doesn't just occur spontaneously or as a result of blood pressure or as a result of connective tissue problems such as Marfan's or Ehlers-Danlos. It can actually occur as a complication of previous operations. Once again, just another example of a dissection. This is predominantly a type B dissection. You can see here the true lumen, you can see the false lumen down here with a clot in it. And you can see how very compromised the true lumen is, and indeed how compromised the branches to the liver and the kidneys and things are. And this is also demonstrating one of the more difficult complications of dissections, long term, and that is this one, just formed an aneurysm. I'm not going to spend much time on this because this really will be covered, I think, during the cardiac surgical side of things, but as you can imagine, sometimes repairing dissections in the ascending aorta require repair of the aortic valve. As you can see here, this is a demonstration of the more classic Beckles type repair, where you have an aortic valve, you have a dacron placed in the ascending aorta and reattachment of the coronary arteries. And you'll hear far more about that from experts.